This room is too big with so little outlets. I'll go over here. Okay, you were saying. Okay, a guy from Poland with his sons came and built the concession stand.
Oh, yeah. So they built that, and then Jenny and Jan, they worked in it. So on a baseball game, we had a baseball game. The mother would be down there, I would be there, and then I would be walking around, make sure everything's okay, you know. And but I had an uncle, Uncle Herb, his name was. He was a druggist, and there's a drugstore down by Lincoln Junior High School, and he owned that drugstore.
Nice.
And my mother, now I was just a young boy, probably your age or something like that, and I would get a cough or something, I didn't feel good. My mother would take me down to the drugstore, and Uncle Herb, he would go behind the counter, you know, and in the prescription area, and then he would have open your mouth, and he would check my mouth and give me some medicine to take care of my cough, you know. And then if maybe I fell down or something someday, and I cut my arm, or my mother would go right down to the drugstore and show Uncle Herb, and he would put some cream on there and patch it up. He was always so helpful. And not only me, I had an older brother, and I had an older sister, and I had a younger sister. And Mother would bring all of them down there, whenever they didn't feel good, you know.
Who needs a doctor when you got that uncle, right?
Yeah, and he was always, he never complained. He was just glad to do something, because my mother and his wife, Esther, were real close friends. I mean, they were sisters, you know, and they loved to talk, you know, and they went to a church. And they would go to prayer meeting, and they'd go to church on Sunday, you know, so we would see each other. And but Uncle Herb, so when we had the baseball park, every once in a while, maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, he would drive out to the baseball park, park his car, and walk down. And then I would see him. Oh, Uncle Herb, oh, so good to see you, you know. And he'd say, well, I want to see a little baseball game, you know. I can't stay too long, but I'll sit down and I'll have a Coca-Cola and maybe a hot dog. So Mother, then he'd see Violet, you know, and he'd sit over there, and then I'd go over and sit down with him and talk to him, and he was so friendly, you know. So he was an encourager. He knew we were doing a good thing, because we were letting so many kids play baseball. That's good exercise. It's good experience, you know. And then
you guys are called the Pony?
Huh?
What were you guys called? Pony something?
Do what?
Oh, what was the name of the field?
Carlson Field.
No. You guys are called the Pony something?
Pony League.
Pony League. Okay.
Yeah, the Pony League, and there was many teams in the Pony League. And in fact, we had some big diamonds, baseball diamonds. There was a man that owned a cemetery, and his son was a neighbor of mine on Parkview Avenue. And I told him one day, I said, the Pony League would like to expand, but we don't have any land. And I said, do you think your father, who owns the cemetery, do you think he would let us build some vacant land that he had way to the south? And so he talked to his father. And then his father called me, and he said, Mr. Carlson, he said, listen, if you want to build some baseball parks, you can build 5 of them. I don't care. He said, that land that I have way to the end of the property, I won't be using that land probably forever, because there was a big forest right between that property and then the cemetery. And he had a lot of room for more people to die. He had a lot of room there. So he said, no, the Pony League can go ahead and develop your own baseball park.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
he gave us, he didn't give us the land, but he gave us permission to use it and not have to pay anything.
Is it still there?
So yeah, and so we built one diamond, and then we had to put a fence around the outfield. Then we had to build some a seating area, and then we built a concession stand. And because I was president of Pony League Baseball, Vi said, "Well, listen, when you go to the ballpark, I'll go with you, and the kids can come too, and I'll take care of the concession stand." So Violet, that was a lot of hard work. I mean, they had to do things in there, clean it up, and do this and do that, and then when people came, they had to get them a Coca-Cola or maybe make them a hot dog or something like that. So Violet, my wife, was very, very good about working. Didn't complain one bit. Of course, we never asked for any money or anything. We were just doing what we thought we should do.
Right.
And pretty soon we built one diamond, and then we built another diamond, and then we heard that there were some women, young girls, that would like to have a softball diamond. So then we built two softball diamonds. So we had boys and girls playing baseball.
Nice.
And that, so when I'm home now, I'm going to try and find out if they're still using, things change
Right.
after so many years.
Oh yeah.
And
It breaks your heart.
oh, I know, you just don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, and like in Mexico, they play a little baseball, but everything is soccer. And soccer is good.
Oh yeah.
Because it's good exercise, but in Rockford, I guess we probably now, because we're having so many immigrants coming from Mexico, that we probably have one or two or three soccer fields in Rockford.
Yes, actually, in Rock Valley, actually.
Do you?
Yeah, we got a huge field. One's
Yeah.
for baseball, one's for soccer, and one's even for football.
Right. So I mean, that's what's happening in the. But soccer, I tell you, soccer is good because the players, you can have, say you have 5 players, or you can have 10 players, because they'll all get a chance to play. They don't stop the game and say you come out. They just blow a whistle and then the players change, And so if you're a substitute, you get to play as much as the regular player. So soccer is very good exercise.
It's very inclusive.
Baseball, I criticize baseball a little bit because
It's not as inclusive.
there's not too much exercise. I mean, you swing the bat, you hit the ball, and maybe you run a little bit, or maybe if you're an infielder, you have to run and you have to pick up the ball and you got to throw. But there's not too much exercise in baseball, and so I mean, I don't know.
What was life like for you when you were a child?
What's that?
What was life like when you were a child?
Well, I had a wonderful father and a wonderful mother. I mean, like you have right here. And my mother was so kind, and she gave us, good 3 meals a day, And my dad was very kind and helpful to me. When I had just finished I was a junior in high school, and my dad knew a man. His name was Espenscheid, and he heard that Mr. Espenscheid was a partner in a boys' camp in Wyoming, and he talked to Mr. Espenscheid, and he said, "How long does the camp? How many boys do you have at the camp?" "Well, we have about 100 boys, and they live in the buildings, And he said, "We give each boy a horse and teach him to ride a horse, and then we take horses and we ride into the country, and then sometimes we have a race with the horses, and we do things, and then we did some other things I can't remember all what we did, but anyways, when I was before that, when I was just like 12 years old or 13 years old, my mother had a sister. She had 5 sisters, my mother.
Wow.
And one of the sisters married a farmer. And my mother, she always wanted me to be a farmer because she grew up on a farm and she just loved the farm, the chickens and gardens and making food, and she just loved it. But back in those days, owning a farm was very expensive. And then you'd have to hire somebody to operate the farm, you know.
Right.
But anyways, but my uncle, he had a farm, and then when I went to the farm with my cousin Mark, he went ahead and got 2 ponies. He said, "You guys got to learn how to ride a horse," and he gave us 2 ponies. Each one had a pony, and no saddle, bareback. And so we would learn to get on the pony, and first we just did a lot of walking with a pony, you know.
Right.
And afterwards, after we got to really know how to handle the pony, we started having races. We would say, "We'll race over to that big tree," and so then we would would just gallop, you know. So I learned how to ride a pony, and then later on, so that as I got older, then there was horses. So at this camp in Wyoming, when you got to the camp, the big camp, they had a big dining room there, and then they had the sleeping areas for all the boys. They said, "Well, now every day you're going to learn how to ride a horse." He said, "You go out, and each one will be given a horse to use." And mine was Brownie. I'll never forget the name, Brownie. So I had to take care of him, and then I had to feed him. They said, "Now he's your responsibility, and you got to go to the barn, and you got to get a pitchfork, and you got to get some hay, and you got to feed him, and then you got to get him some water, and then you got to take him out and ride him a little bit, you know."
Did you get to learn how to clean out his shoe?
Do what?
Clean out his shoe and all that?
Do what?
His hoof. Clean out his hooves and all that?
I don't know what you mean.
Oh, well, sometimes, dirt gets under their hooves and you gotta clean it out.
Oh, well, we had a saddle, and we had the reins. Yeah, we could push this and push that. Anyways, I learned I was I was probably, of all the kids, I was probably the best rider in the whole group. Honest.
Nice. That's
So,
awesome.
Then at the last day, before we were going to go home, they said, "Now today, everybody get on your horse." And then the man in charge, he got on a big horse, and he said, "Now I'm gonna ride over here about 100 yards, and I want all of you guys to chase me
Whoa.
and see who can catch me."
Whoa.
And so then he took off, and then of course all of us kids got on our horses and we went after him. Well, I'm the one that caught him.
Nice.
Yeah. So after I caught him, he said, "Now we're going to go to this big library they had there in a very, very small town. They had a big post office there, and then they had 2 or 3 buildings there. And he said, "We're going to have lunch over there." And so then we went over there, and we had lunch, and then after we had the lunch, they had a little meeting there, and the man in charge got up and said, "Now, we want to award Edwin Carlson because he's the one that caught me. So now we're gonna name him the mayor of this little town." So I was the mayor of that. Of course, there's only 2 or 3 houses and then those 2 or 3 buildings. But anyway, so they honored me by giving me being a mayor. So I'll never forget that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's really funny.
Wow.
No, that was great.
I wonder if that camp is still open.
And then one of the it was about 2 months we were at this camp, and one of them, the Grand Teton Lodge. There's a Grand Teton Mountain, and then they have a huge lodge where visitors come in there, and then they spend 2 or 3 nights there, you know, and then they can go outside. There's all kinds of things to look at. So he said, we're gonna make a long trip. We're gonna ride our horses all the way to the Grand Teton Lodge. And so we took backpacks, you know, sleeping bags and that. So at night when it got dark, we would just stop someplace in the forest, and then we would tie our horses up, and then we put our sleeping bags down on the ground. Luckily, it didn't rain.
Yeah.
And so it took 2 or 3 days for us to get up there.
Wow.
And then when we got up there, they had a big lodge where people could go in and have some food, you know, and look around. They had different things to look at, and so we had a chance to see the lodge, you know, and talk to some of the people, and then we came back and rode our horses all the way back to our camp. No, it was wonderful. I give my dad credit that he was looking out for me, you know. And he wanted me to grow up and have some experiences that were good, you know.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, and then the next year came, and I went back out there.
Nice.
Yeah. And I spent, and then there was a big church near where we had the camp, and on Sundays we'd all get on our horses and ride down to that church, the Church of Transfiguration. That's what was the name of it. It was right near the highway, so cars traveling on the highway, they had a big sign, church services on Sunday, you know. So a lot of the cars, they would pull over and come to the church.
Oh, that's really cool.
And of course, a lot of the ranchers that lived in that area, they belonged to the church. So there probably were 50 people, maybe 75 people. And then we would ride up on our horses and tie the horses up and go in, and then they would we'd have the service, you know. And then they had the church.
100 horses.
Behind the church was a big Yellowstone Lodge, and behind the Yellowstone Lodge was the Grand Teton Mountain. So they had the church fixed. So when you were sitting in the church, they had large windows. You could look through there and you could see the Grand Teton Mountain.
Wow.
It was beautiful.
That sounds
Then,
beautiful.
at the end of the season, Mr. Espenshad, because he drove his car, so he drove me back home because he lived in Rockford. So he said, I have to clean up the camp. So he said, maybe I could find a job for you. Well, there was a big hay ranch. 1,000 acres of hay.
Whoa.
And they hired men, you know, to work on the hay. They had wagons and horses, and they had to cut the wheat, you know. And so he said, I know, I can get you a job over there at the hay ranch.
Nice.
For 1 month. I got $1 a day. That's what the pay was, $1 a day. But you got 3 excellent meals. And a wonderful place to sleep, you know. They had a real nice bunkhouse. So, and we got up early in the morning, you know, and we'd go down to the restaurants that they had, dining room, you know, and we'd have a nice big meal, and then we'd get into some wagons or something, and we'd go out into the field, and we'd cut the hay, and I had to work putting a pitchfork in the hay and throwing it up on the hay rack,
Did you use the cutting hay sort of thing?
Yeah, we had to cut the hay. And anyways, it was one experience that I didn't like is that on a Saturday, some of the men wanted to go to town. That was about 20 miles away, and they had a car, a four-door car, but there was about 6 men. So they said, do you want to go with us? And I said, yeah. Well, there was no room to sit in the car, so they opened the trunk. And then they closed the trunk. and I had to lay down in the trunk. Oh
Oh,
my God!
no.
I was scared to death if they ever had an accident, I'd be trapped. But it worked out all right. I did that twice, I think. Then I said the last time I said I don't want to go to town.
Right.
It's too dangerous, you know.
Oh man.
But I learned a lot of experience, you know.
Nice.
And oh, they fixed beautiful food. I mean, we had eggs and bacon and fruit, and we had they fed us just wonderfully, you
Oh,
know.
that's good.
So it was a wonderful experience for me to work on a hay ranch.
Mhm.
And so then after everything, then Mr. Espenshine said, well, now we can go home. And so his wife kind of worked at the camp. She was kind of one of the cooks, you know. So she was involved in it too, and she was very nice. And no, we had a wonderful experience. So maybe, I don't know, someday, maybe I've told your dad the story. So I mean, I don't know, maybe someday there'll be a camp or something like that. And when you're home,
I used to beg my dad to go camping, but he was like, no, we'll go some other time. But
Yeah.
I begged him and
Well,
never did.
that's something to keep looking for, and maybe you can go to some camp and be with other girls, and you know, you learn some new experiences, you know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I met a lot of other boys. Some of them were from Rockford. The other boys were from other cities, you know, Chicago or someplace. But that was 2 years. I mean, at the camp was a wonderful experience.
Sounds like it.
And then after the second year, then I got a notice in the mail from the government
Oh.
because the war was going on,
Right.
World War II.
Yeah.
And here I was, 19 years old, and
Were you planning on going to the
they
camp?
wanted another soldier, you know.
Mhm.
So my dad said, well, let's go into Chicago and see what you have to do. So my dad went with me into Chicago to the draft board,
Mhm.
and they said, well, what branch of the service do you want to go into? The Army, the Navy, and so my dad got into the conversation, and he read that the Navy had an organization called the Seabees, and they were a construction unit of the Navy, and they men were put into a battalion, 800 men, and they would get men who could drive a tractor. They get men who are carpenter. They would get men who had experience doing construction work. And my dad said that's the branch of service you should join, because you could learn some things about the construction that would help you when you come back from the service.
And
my dad made an excellent decision,
Oh yeah.
because otherwise I had heard so much about the Marines, you know.
Mhm.
They were tough guys, and they were in a battle, and they had rifles, and I might have joined the Marines, and I probably would have been killed.
Your brother had a good foresight.
He had an excellent fortune, and so I joined the Seabees, and then I went away, and we had to go to training camps, and that was 3 years. 3 years of not. I was in the service for 3 years. And then after we went out to the East Coast to 2 or 3 cities and did some training. Most of our training was not sitting in a room with the books or paper in it. The training was all physical.
Mm.
And whichever camp we were at, they would have a path or something where you could run. And so we'd get up early in the morning, before breakfast, and all of us would have to run maybe 5 miles or 10 miles.
Ooh.
And then we would come back to the camp and have breakfast,
Mm.
and then we'd go back out and ride and walk or run, another many probably another couple hours. It was running all day long,
Wow.
but we were getting very healthy.
Right.
Our body was getting strong. And then we went to another camp, and then when that was over, then we took a train and went all the way across the country to California.
Mm.
Then we went to a camp up by San Francisco, and that was more exercise.
Yeah.
All exercise. And then we took a train down to Los Angeles.
Oh.
And when we got to Los Angeles, we spent about a week or two there. Then they said, now you are part of the 74th Battalion, 800 men. Then we got on what they call LSTs. It was a flat bottom boat, and it was 2 stories. And the flat bottom boat, they had a big door, so they would open the door, and then they could drive the tractors and the trucks and everything into the bottom of the ship.
Whoa.
And then they would close the door, and then upstairs we had bedrooms, you know, and so then we got on this LST. He said, well, we're going to go to Honolulu. But the thing is, it only went 10 miles an hour.
Oh.
You know, because it was loaded with all the equipment, and then there probably was there was 800 men, so there probably was we probably had eight LSTs, and probably they could only handle about 100 men, you know.
Right.
So then we were on the ship, and we went to Honolulu. And when we got to Honolulu, they gave us a couple of jobs to do. We had to tear up some sidewalks or something. I forget. It wasn't a big job, but just to keep us busy, you know. And then they said, well, now we're going to get on a big ship. I don't think it was LSTs then. It was a big ship. Maybe it was LSTs. Yeah, it had to be LSTs because our equipment was down below. And they said, now we're going to go out into the ocean. We're going to go to some island. And the name of the island was Tarawa. And the Japanese occupied the island. But America wanted to control that island because then we could build tanks there for fuel. And so when big ships were going towards Japan, they could stop there and they could be refueled, you know. So we went to Tarawa, and then we came close to the island. There were 500 Japanese on the island, and they had built a great big 4-story blockhouse with concrete, all concrete. And then they had taken coconut trees and laced them, nailed them all over the concrete. So,
whoa. I
mean, it was built so bullets and bombs would just bounce off, you know.
Wow.
So then the Marines came, and they landed, and they had a hard time getting to the shore because they had windows, or not windows, but openings in that blockhouse, and they had big guns. So if you were walking in the water,
you were sitting duck.
They would shoot you.
Yeah. And
sure enough, a lot of the Marines had to walk quite a ways, and of course many of them were killed. And finally, the next day, the Marines got smart and they went around to the other side of the island, and there was nobody over there, so they landed over there. And then there was a big battle. We had to get those Japanese out of those blockhouses. All of them were in the blockhouses.
How many were there?
Oh, there was 500, and there was had like a basement. And they had 3 stories.
And you were one of them?
Huh?
You were joining them with the Marines to get them out?
We had to tell them to come out, and of course they wouldn't come out. And then they began shooting back at us, you know. And but the Seabees, we didn't get to shore at that time because we had guns, but the Marines were there. There was 1,000 Marines, and so one.
Did you hear it?
Yeah.
Could you hear it happening?
Huh?
When you were on the boat, could you hear it happening?
Yeah, we could hear it and we could see it. Yeah. We were real close to the shore, so we heard all the guns going off, you know, and everything. And then they had, back in those days at the war, they had flamethrowers.
Oh.
They put a tank on their back, and they had a flamethrower. So somehow, maybe at night or something, 2 or 3 of those flamethrowers could crawl and get up to the blockhouse. And then in the morning, they would take the flamethrower and light it, and they would shoot flames into the blockhouse. And boy, then pretty soon, the Japanese, you know, many of them were burned to death. And so then they had a door, or a big opening, and then the Japanese began coming out And of course, there were Marines all around on the outside, and they had machine guns, and they had rifles, and they had, so they were able to kill the Japanese. And the philosophy, the mental philosophy that the Japanese had during the war is that you never surrender. You fight until you're dead. And so the Japanese would not surrender. They came out of the blockhouse, and they would have a rifle, and they would shoot back at the Americans, but then the Americans would shoot them. But maybe they would capture 2 or 3. Or maybe the Japanese would get away someplace. They would sit down and put a rifle to their head and shoot themselves. The Japanese killed themselves rather than be captured. I remember that when we landed, after the kind of the war was over, we landed, and then the Marines had said, the Marine general, he said, I want you Seabees to bury all the men, Americans and the Japanese, because our men have seen a terrible battle. The Marines lost 1,000 Marines, but the Japanese lost 5,000, and so we had to go around and get all the bodies up and put them in a truck or something and take them down. And then the big tractors we had, they dug a long ditch, you know. And
did you guys not bother to separate them? You just took
no, the Japanese we just put in one great big hole.
Oh, so you did separate them.
Yeah, but the Americans, there was 1,000 Americans. We had to put them. We had to cut a big area. And then lay them side by side, and then have their dog tags. They had a metal dog tag, and they put that up here on the outside, and so they could identify. And then they had to keep records, because after the war, they told people, families, if your son was killed in Europe, or if he was killed in the South Pacific, if you want his body to come back home, you can request it, and then the people would dig down, because they knew exactly where they were. They had a good identification, and then they would bring the body up, and of course rewrap it and everything, and then you could take it home to Chicago or New York or wherever the family wanted it. So many of them were taken back home. Yeah, but I mean, to me that was kind of an expensive. The government paid for it, but that was an expensive
undertaking.
Because they could have just as well been buried there, you know.
But I don't think they realized how much the war was gone.
Because they didn't. They're dead. They don't know what's happening. But the family. I mean, there were a lot of people who were very sentimental. Oh, I want to see. Maybe that was their only son, you know. And they said, no, I want my only son to be buried in this cemetery near our house, you know. So many of them, that was a big job for the government. I don't know. But
so what happened when you came home?
What?
What happened when you came home?
No, then of course we landed and did work there, like I say.
Oh.
Then I worked with some construction men. And they said, well, now we have to go to another island, which is a few miles away. We had to take a boat and go over there to the other island, and we have to build these fuel tanks. And of course we had other ships that came in there with all the metal and everything, you know, and they had to start. They had to dig a foundation, you know, and so I worked with those men. But one morning, after about a few months, I got a pain in my stomach. And I told the foreman, I said, gee, I don't feel good. And he said, well, there's a first aid station that we have here in case something happens. And so he said, why don't you walk down there and have them check you out, see what's wrong. And I went down there, and there were like what they call a corpsman, which were medical assistants, you know. And then, but that day there happened to be a doctor there. Now our battalion, we had 1,000 men. We only had one doctor, and here we were, maybe 5 miles away from the main base.
Wow.
And they had probably 3 or 4 first aid stations, at the main base. But the doctor, for some reason, he had decided to go to our island, and to maybe there was somebody else that was sick. I don't know. But anyway, the doctor was there. He said, "Lay down." He said, "Try and lift your legs." And I'd go like, "Oh, my stomach." He said, "You have appendicitis."
What?
Appendicitis. It's a pain in your stomach,
Oh.
and it's something that you have to take out.
Oh my.
And so he said, "Well, we'll operate tomorrow morning." So
Wow, you got lucky.
I know it. And so he had a needle or something that kind of froze that area, and so I laid there.
Well, you saw everything?
And he operated, and took it out. No, everything's okay, but now you're going to have to rest for maybe a week or two. But so I had to rest, but there was a little pain there. But after about 2 weeks, I was healthy as a horse.
Wow.
I mean, he saved my life.
Wow.
I mean, when I think about that, I mean, it's a true story. One doctor. I mean, we had other men that were like nurses, but I don't think they didn't do operations. Or they would, if you see you cut yourself here, they could patch it up and sew it up, maybe sew it up, and if you got hurt but the doctor, when on a serious operation like appendicitis, that's down here in your stomach, And gee, I don't know. That was a wonderful experience.
God blessed, huh?
Yeah. So then after that, we were on the island. We cleaned up everything, and then we made the landing strip had to be made longer because some of our planes were bigger planes. And then, as I say, we had the fuel tank there, and we had to provide all kinds of like a beach or something there, so that when a big ship came, they would come as close as they came to the shore. Then they would have a hose, a rubber hose, and they would take that rubber hose and go way over for the tank farms to get the oil, the fuel, and then they would pump it back into the. Then we had other ships that came and brought more oil. I mean, we had oil coming and we had oil going,
Yeah.
And then we got on the LSTs again, and we said, "Oh, where are we going?" And they said Okinawa, which is it's near the Philippines, but it's right next to Japan, right near Japan. And it's a big island, a huge island.
How long did it take?
Well, it probably took a week or two. And we landed there, and then we set up a camp, and we had tents. We slept in tents all the time with a cot, just a cot, And then we stayed there, and then we did some work on the roads. The roads were not very good, and we did a lot of road work. And then after about a month, we got word that they were making new B-29 airplanes, brand new airplanes, and for bombing, airplanes. And they said, but there was no airport or landing strip on Okinawa. So they said to our leader, our commander, well, we're going to take 4 CB battalions and put them together. And we're going to build a 6,900 foot runway.
Wow.
And it has to be done in 30 days. I mean, and so what they said, we'll set up lights all over the island, and then we'll fix some of the roads, and then our heavy equipment will scrape the dirt from the hills and fill up all the holes down below it and make a big landing strip in it. So we worked 24 hours a day. Of course, we would work, 10 hours a day, and then we'd go back and have supper and go to bed. But then other men would take our place, So we worked for 24 hours a day for 30 days, and we completed it.
Beat your heart out, everybody else.
Yeah. So we completed the landing strip. Well, then,
nice.
The Army had a big air base on what they call Tinian Island. So President Truman he called some of the generals that were in Acapulco, and he said, what would it cost if we continued the war and just went from Okinawa to Japan? And he said it would probably cost over 1 million casualties. Maybe thousands would be killed. You know.
Mm.
So then President Truman said, "Well, we have 2 atomic bombs.
Mm.
They had been making atomic bombs.
Yeah.
They were very hard to make,
Oh yeah.
and so they said we'll bomb Japan." So he sent the bombs by airplane to the Tinian Island.
Were you in Okinawa when this happened?
Yeah, we were on Okinawa.
Did you feel like possibly a vibration? Did you?
No, because that was farther away from
Yeah.
Japan.
I know, but I just wondered, like, with how big it was. I
Yeah.
just wonder.
But anyways, the first plane that took an atomic bomb was called the Boxcar.
Mm.
No, that was the second plane.
Oh.
Enola Gay was the name of the plane, and they flew to Hiroshima in Japan because they could fly real high, so they could not even be detected.
Mm.
And then of course they had equipment; they knew exactly where they were. So they went over Hiroshima and they dropped the bomb. And the report that I read is over 240 people were killed. 240,000 people were killed. They blew the city. They just blew it up, you know. And so then they flew back to the island. Then the second plane, then the Japanese, they thought, well, maybe they'll surrender now. No, they didn't hear any word from the Japanese. So they had a second plane. It's called a Boxcar.
Mm.
And the Boxcar took off, and they flew to Kokora.
Mm.
And when they got to Kokora, there was a cloud cover. They couldn't see the city. They knew they were right over the city, but they couldn't see it. So then they said, after about 1 hour, they said, well, go to Nagasaki and drop your bomb at Nagasaki, another Japanese city. So they flew to Nagasaki and they dropped their bomb. And then they turned around and they were going to fly back to Tinian. And Tinian Island, they called them on the phone and said, no, you'll never make it because you use too much fuel. But they said, go to Acapulco, the southern part of Acapulco, and there's an airstrip for B-29s. And that's the airstrip that we built. Mm-hmm. And so the plane went all the way down to Acapulco. One engine had already gone out.
Whoa.
They had 4 engines. But he landed safely.
Oh, good.
So he landed safely on the island, on the airport that we had built.
There you go.
We saved the whole crew.
Great.
You know, holy mackerel.
Woo.
And what I'm sorry about is there's not too many stories about that. I don't know.
Right?
They talk about, well, the war. And then when they got back to Tinian Island the next morning, the Japanese surrendered.
Mm.
They gave up.
Did you know if you go to Japan where the bombs were, dropped, you can see ashes of people that were there.
Is that right?
Yep. They're like shadowed people now. They're just shadowed, and that's them.
Yeah. Gee.
See.
No, so that was a wonderful experience, and but the only trouble is that it's probably been published, but I've never read it. I mean, in a newspaper. So they of course they just talk about, well, the war ended. That's all they talk about, and it did end. Who was it? General MacArthur. He was the highest general we had, and so he got on a battleship, and he went to Japan.
To negotiate.
Yeah, and then they had the negotiations. The Japanese came from Japan. They flew down there, and then they wrote up the rules about the war, and so the Japanese surrendered. And then after that, then MacArthur, they sent him to Japan to kind of, and of course a lot of Americans went with him, and to be sure that the Japanese people had really forgiven, you know.
Yeah.
But what happened was the Japanese military, the government had like we have a military. But the Japanese military, they wanted to conquer the world. They wanted to be, and so the civilians, the people who lived in Japan, well, they didn't approve of that. They didn't want that. But the military was so strong that they built their own battleships, and they trained their soldiers and that, and then of course the big thing is that they went to Pearl Harbor, Honolulu, and a surprise attack, and gee, they sunk a lot of our ships, and they killed a lot of Americans, and that's when America kind of woke up.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we've got to develop an army,
Right.
and we're going to have to go after the Japanese.
It's rather poetic. It started in a island base and it ended in an island base.
Yeah.
It's rather poetic.
But the Japanese, I think, the Japanese people are good people.
Oh yes.
But it was just that darn military that wanted to be famous. They wanted to expand Japan all over the world. I mean, they wanted to conquer America. I mean, there's no question about it.
Oh yeah.
So I mean,
The Japanese are kind of like an earlier version of America if you think about it.
yeah,
Because the Japanese, the problem with the army is that they took too much pleasure in trying to be like China,
yeah,
and that's where it got toxic.
yeah, right. So I don't know, but that's part of my experience. I mean,
Wow.
well then when we landed on Okinawa, we had a camp. We had tents and that, and then cots and that. And then one day, a couple of guys said, Carlson, he said, could you take 5 canteens and walk down to the army base? This is probably only about 2 miles away. Go down the road and come to the army base, and they have fresh water. And fill these canteens with water. Only 5 or 6 of them. And so I started walking down the road. And then the road made a big curve like this. And I thought, gee, rather than walk all the way around, why don't I just cut across?
Oh no.
And of course, our road was higher. And then down below, there was a little bit of water. I could see the water. And but I could just step on that and then go up and keep on walking. And I would save a lot of time. I might save 20 minutes or something.
Okay.
And so I went down, after I got off the road, and I went down the bank, and I stepped into that water, and it was mud. And I went up to my knees. I took another step, and I had mud up to my chest.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought to myself, I could die right here. And I just said, God help me. I just yelled at it.
Right.
And then the next step I took, there was a little harder ground.
Oh.
And I was able to pull myself out of that mud. And I had mud all over me.
Oh.
So I had to sit down there and literally take off my clothes and wash them in the water.
Right.
And I finally got dressed, and I was able to go down and get the water, but I stayed on the road all the way back. But I mean, I could have drowned right there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's the second 2 times in the service that I almost died. So I mean, God was with me. There's no
amen.
question. Yeah.
No question.
Gee, but
No question.
yeah. But during we had good mail service back in those days. I had cousins. I had some aunts and uncles and that, and I would get letters from a couple of my aunts, and most of the letter was about, Ed, are you praying every day? I know you're in a very dangerous. I mean, so we are praying at home for you. We're asking God to protect you. So I mean, I was getting some real encouraging letters that I could kind of think to myself, God has been good to me. He saved me twice now, and when I get back home, I'm not going to forget God. I want to go to church. Before that, my dad and mother and our family would go to Emmanuel Lutheran Church for Sunday school, and we had different classes for the ages, and then we would stay for church. And even though I was young, just a young kid, I mean, I sat there and listened to the sermon, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and then we would come home and Mother would fix a good lunch. But then even on Thursday night they had prayer meeting, and Mother and Dad would take us to the prayer meeting at church. So I had a good bringing up, you know, like you going to church,
Mm-hmm.
and then learning how to pray, you know, and asking God to help you, and so then that continued when I got married. Violet was a wonderful Christian, you know.
Mm-hmm.
She had grown up in a church too, the Trinity Lutheran Church, and so all of our kids, like Brad went to Sunday school, and all of the kids went to Sunday school and church with us. And in fact, Brad was confirmed. He was confirmed in confirmation. But then he met Ellen. They fell in love, and they said they wanted to get married. They got married at Salvation Army.
Ah.
Yeah. So I mean, Brad had good Christian bringing up, but when he joined that darn rock and roll, see those guys, they never went to church.
Mm.
They didn't believe in God, and he got mixed up with them, and then pretty soon he just stopped going to church, you know. And
I didn't know
Bun
was married.
Yeah, huh?
Bun was married? Bun.
Bun.
Yeah, he was married?
Yeah, he got married. Yeah, Ellen is his wife, yeah.
Oh.
We don't see her very much. I don't know. She stays home.
I never really knew he was married.
She grew up in a big family.
Mm.
There was 10, I think there was 10. She was the 10th child or 9th child
Whoa.
in the family. But then her father got into a dispute with the mother, and the father left. And so she had a bad experience there, seeing her father leave the family, you know. But she had a wonderful mother. But then somehow she met Bun, and then they got married in Rockford at the Salvation Army, and they're still married. But I don't know. Ellen's a little bit different. I mean, I think it's because her father left, and I don't know. She's just a little bit different. But Bun and her get along real good, but they don't have any children. I guess they made a decision. No, they didn't want to have a family, you know. But so they're happy where they're living out there in the country. But in fact, Bun he called me at the hospital today, and he said, "Oh, everything's going good." He said he started a little band in maybe you heard about it. There's a small tavern called Mary's Tavern.
Yes.
And they go down there. They couldn't go down because of the back COVID, you know. So for about 2 years, but now they're going back there, and people come in there. I don't. Maybe they charge them $1 or something, but here 40 or 50 or 60 people come in to hear the band, you know.
Yeah.
Because he's the drummer, and then he's got other people that have played in bands, and they play there for about 2 hours, and then of course they go home. But it's very popular with a lot of young people and older people. So so he's starting to play again.
Yeah, you know, I have friends who are not religious, and some who are from other religions.
Oh yeah.
I took inspiration from what Jesus did.
Oh yeah.
And I try to tell people it's not my place to judge.
Yeah.
But I am a Christian.
Yeah.
And I accept you as a human being.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be like him.
Yeah. Well, when I married Vicki, she belonged to in Acapulco to Maranatha Presbyterian Church, a Protestant church. And Mother and I, we would stay at a condominium, and then on Sunday we would both get a taxi and go over to the church. And Vicki would sit next to us, and she would tell us, because it's all in Spanish, and she would tell us what the pastor said, you know. So we would do that, and so Vicki was very good on Sundays to help us. And now, when I got married and I went back down to Acapulco, she says, "Ed," she said, "all my life, I try to pray every day, read the Bible a little bit and pray. So can you do that? Can you do that with me?" I said, "Oh, sure." So every day at around 11 o'clock,
Mm.
she said, Dad, have we read the Bible today? And I didn't know. Well, come on. And we sit down there and we open the Bible and we kind of jump around. But now we're on the New Testament. We started with the new Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and now we're up to Peter, I think it is. But so I would read the Bible sometimes, maybe 1 or 2 chapters, and then now she's been reading the Bible 1 or 2 chapters, and then after that, I would pray for my family and for things that are happening in Acapulco, and then she would pray, and she would pray for. She has 6 children, and she would pray for her children, and pray for what's happening in Acapulco. We've had a lot to pray about because of this COVID has been very dangerous, you know.
Oh,
Gee, it's killed a lot of people in Acapulco,
yeah.
and it's killed people in Rockford. I mean, it's just
Oh,
terrible.
wow.
Ish. But now I think it's getting a lot better. But so we would pray, and then after that, maybe another hour, we'd have lunch. We had lunch at we have breakfast at 9 o'clock, and we have lunch at 2:30. And we have eggs and toast and potatoes and that for breakfast, and fruit. And then at lunch we'd have maybe soup, and then have some meat, chicken or some kind of a meat, and then we'd have a dessert, and then after we ate our meal at 2:30. Then Vicki and I would play a game of marbles.
Nice.
Yeah, and we'd play 2 games of marbles, and she won most of the time. She was very good at that, and but we had a lot of fun playing that. And then I would go over and sit down and watch television. I did a lot of, and then some days when I was really feeling good, the first 7 or 8 years then we would we have to go to Walmart, get some groceries. So then she had a real nice car. So we would back the car out, and then we'd go to Walmart, and I would pay for part of the groceries, and she'd pay for part of the groceries. And she would, you have a cart, you know, and she would fill those carts up. Now, for the last 6 months, I haven't been feeling too good to go walking around. So then the maid we have is Letty. And Letty, every 2 weeks, she takes 14 bags. The bags are like this, you know, with a big handle up here. She would take 14 bags and leave about 8 o'clock. And she would walk. Sometimes she would take a taxi. It was about 10 blocks down to Walmart. And she would go to Walmart and get into a big cart. And she knew exactly what to buy, you know, milk and cereal and eggs. And she would go around and fill those 14 bags of groceries. And then she'd put them all in the cart, you know, after she pays for them. Vicki would give her money. And then she would push the cart out to the main road. Then there would be taxis there. And a taxi driver, he would take the bags and put them in the back of it and then drive her home, you know. And then the taxi driver, he would help carry the bags up to the house.
That's good.
But, I mean, that's a big job.
Oh.
I mean, 14 bags of, oh my, it's heavy, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Letty is so kind. She never complains. I mean, she's so kind and a wonderful cook. And then now, or even before that, she has one son, a single son, that lives in an apartment in Acapulco. Sometimes he would come over 2 or 3 times a week for lunch. But then sometimes we would invite friends of ours to come. Well, why don't you come for lunch today? And so Letty she's feeding not only 2 of us, sometimes she's feeding 3 or 4 more. And she doesn't mind. I mean, she just does the cooking, you know, and prepares the food. And then as I say, we eat at 2:30. Then we don't eat at all. But then we have a pool in the backyard. And so then at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, we'd get our swimming suits on. We'd go into the pool for 40 minutes, and then we had these these long, I can't think what they are. You put under your neck, you know, and then you can kind of float.
Oh, noodles?
Noodles, like, yeah.
Yes.
And so we had two of them. So I would use the big one, and then I could lay on my back, and I could move my arms in the water, and then I could kick my legs. It was good exercise for 40 minutes, you know, every day. We didn't miss a day. And even though sometimes we had to miss a day because it rained, you know, we didn't want to go in there. But and then the water got to be real cold for a while. So then she was able to get someone to come, and they put a little burner or something with a hose on it, and it would take water out of the a pool, and it would go through this little thing and then come out heated.
Nice.
So before we went in the pool, we'd turn that on it and try to heat the pool up a little bit. But lately now the water's been just fine. So because we've had a lot of rain down in Acapulco, they have different seasons of the weather, and during the summer it is a lot of rain. We've had rain that poured down for 1 or even 2 days. Pour down rain, so you don't even want to go outside, you know. And so the weather is funny. But then Vicky says, and of course we knew it later on, but now it's what is it, Lieutenant? It's November now. Well, at the end, in the middle of November, the rain stops. I don't know how they can control that, but there's no rain. So in January, February, and March, Acapulco has beautiful sun and no rain. And that's why my brother and his wife, they went to Acapulco. And after they went for 2 years, they came back and said, Ed, you and Vi got to go to Acapulco. The weather is just tremendous. And that's when we went down there. And then we met Vicky, and she became a real good friend. And no, it was just wonderful. You know.
That's wonderful.
What's happening?
I'm just trying to find out what kind of TV this is.
Oh.
Maybe what kind of TV this is.
I don't know. Those whatever that means.
Yeah.
Okay,
So what was let's see, I have other questions. What was the process behind building the Western Town?
Well, yeah, that was a big decision. After the kids had all grown up, Vi just loved antiques. We used to, Thursday night, Gunsmoke was a program. I think it was a half an hour, I don't know. But we would be sure that we're both home, and we would sit and watch Gunsmoke. And that showed the Old West, you know.
Yeah.
And how they lived in the Old West. And so she began to get interested in antiques, because at that time, a lot of mothers and families they would buy antiques, you know, and put them in the house. And my mother bought antiques, and so then she began to say, "Listen, I'd like to start collecting antiques." And then, and so she opened. Kurt had a vacant space up in the shopping center up there, and so he said, "You can have that space." So then she put some things in there, and then she put a big sign, and then she advertised that buying antiques. Well, at that time, 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago, when the kids were all grown up, she had time to get in the car, and she drove up there, and she fixed some antiques in the store, and then she advertised. Well, then what happened was, not too many people bought antiques, and you know, it's just one more thing to have in the house, you know. But there's a lot of young people that grew up, and their mother and father had a lot of antiques in the house, and so they heard about the antique store that she would buy and sell antiques. So they would bring their antiques. Maybe they had an old chest, or they had some kind of some pictures or something like that. So they would bring them over to the antique store, and then Vi would be able to decide what she wanted, and she would buy them. Well, then she began buying so darn many antiques she began bringing them home. And then when she brought them home, we needed more space.
Right.
And so I had a good roofer. He was an older guy, and he had two sons, and they built the concession stand. And I told the father, I said that I wanted to build a one-story building. Part of it was going to be two-story, and then the rest of it would be one-story. Well, I'll build it. You get the lumber, I'll build it. And sure enough, Jacob, and his two sons, no blueprints, no nothing.
They built that Western town?
Yeah, that's the Western town. And
Wow.
they built the whole, that one side, the north side, they built that whole side.
Wow. I would have never guessed
Yeah,
that.
and then so when Vi began buying these antiques, we'd bring them home, and then we started putting them in that building.
Wow.
And we had desks, and we had tables, and we had a great big, not a refrigerator, an old ice box. And that ice box was a huge ice box. And then after a lot of the antiques were brought in there, and then we built. We filled that with antiques. A lot of people that she knew said, "Could we have a tour?"
Yeah, keep going.
Go ahead.
Keep going. Yeah, I know. It is one. Okay, keep going.
Could we have a tour of your Western town? So Vi was always so, oh sure, come on over. So that maybe 5 or 6 or 7 women would get together, and they'd come over, and then Vi would go down the general store, and she would tell them about this and tell them about that. They all interested in it, you know. And then after it was all over, maybe Vi would talk to them, and then we had a maid, Mildred, and she would fix some coffee, and then they would come in the kitchen, and they would sit down and all have a cup of coffee. And then before they left, they said, you know, I've got a couple antiques at home, and you know, so some of them came back, and they said, oh, we appreciate the tour. Oh, we learned so much about antiques and that. Here, this is a little disc that my mother had collected years ago. You can have it and put it in your, and they gave us clothes, and many people gave us a lot of antiques.
Wow.
And then I had a roofing salesman that I worked with, and then he heard about our Western town, and of course he went through it and seen it. So whenever he came to Rockford, and I would buy some of his roofing material and that, then he would say, oh here, I got this little cart here, an old-fashioned, you know, something, and here you can have. So he gave us a lot of antiques.
Wow.
Oh, he was so kind.
Oh.
Russ Garlock, he was a wonderful guy. But anyways, that's how it all got going.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long did it take for? Didn't you guys give school
Nope.
kids a tour?
Do what?
I remember you guys would do tours for school
they
kids.
did that.
For
School
schools?
kids came over, yeah.
The schools?
They would come over. Kids.
Yeah, then school children came.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had, once we went, I think it was a Belvedere school. Somehow, one of the teachers heard that we had the antique store, and that Mrs. Carlson would take kids on a trip. They could learn about the old days, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would come with about 20 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then mother would tell them about this and tell them about that in the old days. And then she would also give them something about the Bible or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Then she would say to the kids, do you boys and girls know that the early Americans who settled in Rockford and this area, most of them went to church, and most of them had their children go to Sunday school. I mean, back in those days, people went to Sunday school,
Oh yeah.
and they went to church.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I went to Sunday school when I was 5 years old. I mean, that was the way it was. And so mother would be able to talk to these kids, you know. Sometimes the teachers didn't like her to talk about Christianity, you know, because their schools are public, you know.
Right.
They
Well, you did come to her house.
Yeah,
so.
you came to my house, and I can do whatever I want.
Right.
And she would tell them that. And then sometimes the teachers would come back, and because she would find an antique or something like that, and she said, you didn't charge us anything, and the children really enjoyed the, you know, the tour and everything, and so here you can have this antique, you know.
Nice.
So we got a lot of antiques through gifts and that.
Wow.
And then, what was it? Yeah, there was you ever heard of Billy the Kid?
Yes.
He was an outlaw.
Oh yeah.
And he, you know, he killed people, he robbed banks and everything else, and finally, a sheriff caught him and shot him. But they checked all of his records back in those days, and all they could ever find was one little card about like that, with a picture of him. They've never been able to find a picture of Billy the Kid. But finally, this museum someplace found this picture.
Really?
And they had it in the museum, and of course under protection they guarded it very good, because a lot of people just love the Old West, you know. And so then they said one day, we're going to have an auction of a lot of our old antiques, and we're going to have an auction of Billy the Kid. And so they had a big auction, and I used to get Western magazines. Edwin knows about that. I had a lot of Western magazines, and in the Western magazine it said that the auction was going to be down south. I forget where it was. And then the next issue said, well, we had the auction, and we had Billy the Kid came up for sale.
Oh.
And they had a lot of bidders on it.
I bet.
But one man from Florida, a very wealthy man, Mr. Koch, K-O-C-H. I know what the price was. I can't think of it. 1.2 million or something like that. They bid it up, you know, $500, $600, $700, $800, $1,000, up to 1,500,000 or something. And he put the last bid in, so he got the Billy the Kid. And so I read about that. And so I thought to myself, I wish I could get a hold of him so he could come to Rockford and see all of our old antiques, you know. And he might be interested in one of them.
Yes.
So I got somehow I got his address where he lived. He lived in New Massachusetts. So I wrote a letter. And in the letter I said, Mr. Koch, he said...
okay, dinner's ready? Alfie, dinner's ready.
Okay, just hold on.
No, that's all right.
No, keep going.
So I said, in the letter I wrote, I said, talked about antiques and that, and I told a story in there that we had a lot of antiques, you know. And I had his address, and I mailed it. Well, 4 months, I didn't hear anything. And I thought, well, he threw that away. Then I got a call from Massachusetts, his manager, and he said, Mr. Koch, he said he really enjoyed your letter. He said, so he said he'd like to know more about all the antiques that we had.
Nice.
Because he was building a western town on his ranch in Wyoming.
Oh.
Colorado. Gunnison, Colorado. He had a 5,000 acre ranch, and he wanted to build a western town because he loved the Old West. So he started building the western town. Of course, he's looking for antiques, you know. And so the manager said, "Well, we're going to send two men
Air
out.
message on my TV.
2 men out to Rockford, and they're going to look at what you have." So they came out to Rockford, and Mother was still alive. She was still healthy, and so she talked to them too about all the antiques, where we'd bought them, and all that. And so I took them through the whole western town. They saw all the pictures that we had, and all the antiques, and the pianos, and different things. And then they said, well, they came back in the living room, and they sat down, and they talked to both of us, and they said, well, we've seen a lot. We've taken some pictures of things. So we'll go back to Massachusetts, and we'll talk to Mr. Koch and see if he's interested, you know, doing something.
No.
So they went back, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, I got a call. Well, Mr. Koch wants 2 men to come out who are appraisers. They appraise antiques, what value they're worth.
Right.
And have them go through your house and just see So they
His
went
first
through
name
the
is
whole
Edwin,
house.
E-D-W-I-N,
And,
last name is Carlson.
and then Ginny,
C-A-R,
my mother was real
Carlson.
sick then, so Ginny went with me with him, and I showed him, the printing department that we had, and I showed him an old refrigerator we
Good,
had.
I've got a
And the
box.
refrigerator,
I've got a
that was
a
given
small
to us
box,
by
you
a
know, I've got the
woman
main
whose
box downstairs, the
whose
X1
mother,
box,
whose
but then it's got a TV in the back
whose
room,
dad
and it has
her
a
dad
little
owned a grocery store, and they were
and,
closing it. And they
we
had
got
this
a new
great
TV
big
about 6 months ago, so I don't know. Maybe he
refrigerator.
really watches TV much, but anyways, when I turned it on, it says something
and
is
she
not
said,
quite right. Please give us
If you
a call.
wanna go over and take
Xfinity,
it, pick
we'll
it
get
up,
this
you have
fixed
to
right
take
for
a
you.
truck and
And on the right side,
4 or
it
5
has
men.
XRE
You can have that big refrigerator. It was
00250.
about 8 feet long
Whoa.
and about 5 feet high. Okay.
To fix that
Yeah.
issue that you have here, Edwin, right? And I already see here that there's
Hey, Tim's finished.
Right.
one of your cable box.
Yeah, one of my cable boxes isn't quite working right.
Okay, got it. So, sir, this is what I'm gonna do. I'll be the one to fix that issue that you have here on your account. And after this, once I'm done fixing the issue, that's the time that you check
Sure.
the TV if it's
Okay.
working right.
Sure.
Can you please turn off the TV first?
Turn it off? Okay, I will,
Yes, the
I will,
TV
I will
that is not working.
turn the TV off. Okay, I'll turn the TV off. Okay,
Just the
TV's
TV,
off.
not the box, okay?
Yep, TV's off, not the box. Yep.
Alright, thank you. And right now, I'm sending multiple signals, okay?
Alright.
And for this one, it will take about
I
1
see.
to 2 minutes.
Do you wanna come sit at the table, or do you want me to bring it in here to you?
No, maybe when you, I'll go out.
Time there.
Yeah, no, I'll come out. Yeah.
Yeah, let me go to the bathroom and wash and then I'll come out.
Okay.
And I'll check everything here in my end,
Great,
okay?
great.
And I'm really happy, sir, that I got your call today, okay?
Yeah.
And thank you for your patience also. And now, I'm doing the system refresh.
Alright,
Boxer,
Okay.
correcting the XRE 00250. So give me 1 moment. And by the way, sir, how's your day so far?
so far so good. I got my father up here from, he is living in Mexico. I brought him up here for some medical treatment. And I put him in the back room here and turned on the TV, and I can't get the darn TV. I mean, the TV works fine with a smart TV, but I can't get Xfinity to come on the TV.
Oh, okay. I did enjoy your time with your father, sir. It's
Thank you.
great that you still have your father, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I miss my father also, but he's not here already.
I know, my dad's 98. 98.
Oh.
So, yeah, he had to come up for
Yeah,
some
that's
medical
away.
treatment.
My dad passed away 69, I think.
Wow.
69.
Jeez.
That's he's too young.
I don't know.
Yeah. He drinks a lot, and smoke a lot.
Oh.
And that's the reason he got cancer.
Oh boy.
It's good, and I hope your father stay 100 more.
Yeah, I hope so.
Actually, he can travel.
Yeah, he can travel.
Mexico, yeah, okay, that's great.
And help him through the,
So,
help him quite a bit. He can barely walk, but he still walks a little bit.
with company,
Yeah.
not by yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. And now, the system is now doing the final signals here.
Okay,
So it will
great.
take, a minute.
Sure.
Bear with me.
Sure.
Dinner's on the
Yeah,
table.
I'll grab that to the table.
Okay, no, I'm just, then you know.